It truly is a joy to be with you this morning. I often join you online because I really enjoy your community of faith, and online I get to see my grandchildren on Sunday mornings, and I get to see how much energy they bring and the insights of whoever is doing the 2-minute message, because you have to be able to think theologically on your toes when you are chatting with children who often have incredible insights into how God is revealed in our world. This is the last Sunday before we begin our journey through Lent, a 40-day journey that takes us to Jerusalem and to the cross. Transfiguration Sunday is the last Sunday in this season of Epiphany, which began on January the 6th. The bookends of this season go from baptism of Jesus on the first Sunday to this Sunday of Transfiguration. And what's really interesting is that both those Sundays share similar words in the gospel. When Jesus is baptized and comes out of the Jordan, God spoke and Jesus heard, "This is my beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And now, 6 weeks later, near the end of Jesus' 3-year ministry among the people, we hear very similar words. "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." My friends, please pray with me. By the power of your Spirit, O God, may our hearts be opened and our minds engaged, and may my words be transformed into your word for us this day. Amen. Some weeks it's really hard to make the links between the lectionary readings, and other weeks the connections are wonderfully obvious and informative. And this is one of the weeks where the Hebrew scripture and the gospel are beautifully interwoven. The word transfiguration is not one that we use very often. It has a couple of meanings. It means a change that glorifies or exalts, or a marked change in form or appearance, a metamorphosis, like the example of the rescue bot Transformers, which I had so much fun with the children. Something becomes something else. Any of you Harry Potter fans? Yes? So maybe you remember the word transfiguration from Harry Potter, because at Hogwarts, the school that Harry and his friends attend, Transfiguration is actually one of their classes. And in the beginning book, Hermione says, "I do hope they start right away. There's so much to learn. I'm particularly interested in transfiguration. You know, turning something into something else." Of course, it's supposed to be very difficult. And Percy, her friend, responds, "You'll be starting small, just matches into needles and that sort of thing." Well, transfiguration is that change in form, a metamorphosis. And both of our texts this week include transfiguration or change. And in both cases, the event is meant to fuel the faith of their respective witnesses for the long and sometimes frightening journey ahead. Moses meeting God on Mount Sinai is essential to the people of Israel as they face a 40-year journey through the wilderness to the Promised Land. Likewise, the Transfiguration in Matthew is essential to the disciples as they head into the terrifying time of the Passion. And both of those texts can speak to us as we face into our 40-day observance of Lent. In the case of Moses, we are told that whenever Moses encounters the presence of God on the mountaintop, his physical appearance actually changes, such that when he comes back down the mountain, his face is shining, and Aaron and all the people of Israel recognize that this is proof that Moses has been in the presence of the Lord. I was thinking about that this week, and thinking, Moses is not the only one to have their face radiate with love and joy. It happens when people experience love, especially young love or sometimes really old love that's lasted a long time. And I bet you've seen it as well when someone falls in love, or you notice two people deeply in love, their whole complexion changes. We often speak about someone's face lighting up, and everyone can see that they have had an encounter with love. Well, the same thing happens really with Matthew in the gospel. Jesus also has this encounter with God. But I think it's important for us to remember that Moses doesn't need the mountaintop experience with God in order to bolster his own confidence and faith. Moses has been in conversation with God since the moment of his call in front of a burning bush. The mountaintop exchanges with God are actually meant for the people who witness it. They are meant for the people of Israel. So God pulls out all the stops, we're told: thunder and lightning, trumpets blazing, fire, thick clouds billowing. It sounds kind of like a rock concert, or maybe the opening of a Super Bowl halftime show, if anybody watched it last week. It's God's way of communicating to the people of Israel that I am who I am is with them. So that's Moses' experience. And then we have Jesus. And Jesus doesn't need his encounter with God on the mountain to bolster his spiritual confidence either, or to enter into conversation with God. But it has a transformative impact on Peter, James, and John. I was fortunate 3 years ago to journey to the top of Mount Tabor, which is considered to be the most likely site of the Transfiguration. And there it is in the distance. In comparison to the mountains I saw in Colorado a few weeks ago, Mount Tabor is not a particularly high mountain, but it is significant. And you'll see here a group of us journeying, because to get to the top of the mountain, most tourists take a van ride to the top. But our guide insisted that we get out and walk, because to walk the last part of the journey on our own feet, there is something embodied about that experience, moving your own body up to the top of the mountain. It is a transformative experience. So up we climbed until we were at the top. And then we saw, can you just pop back a slide? And then we saw the church, which sits at the top. This current church is part of a Franciscan monastery that was completed in 1924, but it was built on the ruins of an ancient Byzantine church, probably somewhere in the 4th to the 6th century. And this place at the top of Mount Tabor has been a place of pilgrimage since the 400s. And like many places in Israel, Palestine, it is a place imbued with a sense of the holy. And as you might expect, the interior of the church is painted with beautiful images in the gospel account. If you look above the altar, you'll see Jesus with Moses and Elijah, as well as Peter, James, and John. On the chapel vault to the left, you see this image of Moses representing the law. You can see the tablets. And correspondingly on the right, this image of Elijah, who represents the prophets. The text, the gospel text, tells us that Jesus took 3 of his disciples up this high mountain apart from themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white. Well, what exactly transpired, we can never know. What we do know is that it was a spiritual mountaintop experience for those 3. And the presence of Moses and Elijah conveyed that Jesus had come to fulfill all that was said in the law and the prophets. And Peter, well, Peter just wants it to last, right? This is really good. This is really nice. Jesus, can we just stay here? Let's just stay here in this spiritual high. I could pitch some tents. Let's stay. And you know, we can kind of all understand that, right? When life is good, when you feel close to God, when everything is going well, you just want to stay in that place. I think that, you know, Mount Tabor and this experience of the Transfiguration, it was what the Celtic people termed a thin place. A sacred space where the veil between this world and whatever vision we have for heaven intertwine, where they just come so close. And I don't know about you, but I've experienced some of those thin places in my life, times when the presence of God feels really close. There are geographical places that are known as thin places. Certainly the island of Iona is considered a thin place. Many of the places I've been blessed to travel in Israel, Palestine are thin places. But thin places can also be the quiet stillness of my cottage by the lake. For some places, some people, thin places are in your garden. Thin places are any place where the Spirit of God draws close. And who wouldn't want to freeze those fleeting moments when, as the old hymn says, we're lost in wonder, love, and praise. They wanted to stay on the mountaintop, but that is not where life is lived. As my friend Hugh Farker wrote in a little reflection this week, we can never stay there. The disciples had to go down the mountain, and they were immediately confronted by a distraught parent pleading on behalf of his suffering son. The mountaintop experience was inspiring, but they could not linger long there. The down-to-earth realities of ordinary life and the need of hurting people were waiting at the foot of the mountain. Nevertheless, our mountaintop moments do give us the courage and the strength we need to live our lives in the trenches of daily life. And they help us to see the glimpses of God's glory in our otherwise difficult days. We glimpse that moment when the evening news reflects nothing but chaos, and then there's a small piece of good news in the midst of tragedy. Like the woman rescued from the horrible rubble in the aftermath of the earthquake in Syria. And she survived for 5 days because I think she had some pretty amazing rescue bots move in and unearth that rubble. Sure, there's suffering, but there is holy ground, and God is present in suffering and sacrifice just as God is present in the promise and potential of our lives. The moment of transfiguration is that point at which God says to the world and to each one of us that there is nothing we can do to prepare for or stand in the way of joy or sorrow. We cannot build a monument and we cannot keep God and ourselves safe. But we also cannot escape the light that God will shed on our path. We cannot escape God, Emmanuel among us, if we have eyes to see. A woman I know really well shared what I consider to be a lovely transfiguration story. Her dear mom, faithful and loving and a longtime member of her church, told her children that when she died, she didn't want her funeral in the church because the church was only for good people. When she died, the family, and it was a very large family, decided that the church was the only place big enough to hold them, so they went against their mother's wishes. As my friend sat in the church, wondering if they had done the right thing, a hauntingly beautiful ray of sunshine came through the stained glass window and shone on the casket. And my friend said, it was as if God was saying, it's all good. Being Christian means savoring those mountaintop experiences when they come along. Moments when we do discern truth and sense God's nearness. But that can never be all there is to it, because Jesus always leads us down the mountain to where human siblings need care and healing. We are not invited to stay on the mountaintop agog at a transformed Jesus. We are invited to follow Jesus down the mountain, to be lovers and healers in the valley of the world's pain and sorrow. On the mountain, the disciples fell down in fear, and Jesus came to them and placed his hand on them and said, "Get up, do not be afraid." So up they got, and down they went, for life is not lived on the mountain, but it is lived in the day-to-day events of life. And thanks be to God, we do not travel alone. And so we move into this season of Lent this week, starting on Ash Wednesday, and journeying with Jesus through these 40 days till Easter. And we do it, my friends, in the company of the one who was called and claimed as beloved, and who calls us and claims us the same way. Thanks be to God.